Let's move to the next session. Topic for the last panel discussion is deciphering stressed assets market from investors' vantage point. This session will cover points like measures to be taken by investors in relation to existing bids, lack of interest in bidders due to COVID-19 pandemic, as they are involved in BCP of their own, etc. I would like to invite Sanjay Jain, CEO, Aditya Birla Arc Limited, to moderate this discussion. He has over 25 years of rich and varied experience in financial markets, covering projects and corporate finance, capital markets, mergers and advisory services, and restructuring and resolution of stressed accounts. Prior to joining Aditya Birla Arc, he worked with Arcel, GM Financial Group, SBI Capital Markets Limited, and State Bank of India. Mr. Jain is a chartered accountant by profession. Over to you, Mr. Jain.
A very good afternoon to all of you. I welcome you all to this panel discussion. This Indian banking sector has seen a high level of stress for last couple of years. The stress level peaked at 10.2 lakh crore rupees in March 2018. In percentage terms, it was 11.6%. In past 2 years, we have seen resolution of some large accounts and accelerated provisioning and write-off by the banking sector. As a result, the NPAs in the banking sector has come down to 8.5%. Of course, we have seen COVID-19 pandemic, and as a result, it is expected that stress in the banking sector is likely to go up. By various reports, this stress is likely to be around 10 to 11% by March 21. High level of stress has seen lot of policy measures by Government of India as well as Reserve Bank of India. We have seen enactment of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code in 2016, which got operationalized in December 2016. We have also seen lot of policy measures by Reserve Bank of India. We have seen RBI Resolution Framework 2018, which got amended in 2019 by Reserve Bank of India. We have also seen revised guidelines by Reserve Bank of India for sale of financial assets by banks to ARCs, which is limiting banks' investment in security receipts being issued by ARC companies. The high level of stress and various policy measures have seen participation of lot of strategic as well as financial investors. We have seen strategic investors participating through IBC process as well as RBI Resolution 2019 framework. And we have seen financial investors participating through IBC, through RBI Resolution Framework, as well as they are also big subscriber of security receipts issued by ARC companies. Just to give some data points, in last couple of years, we have seen resolution of 250 cases through IBC process, which involves a total debt of 4.7 lakh crore rupees, and banks have recovered almost 2 lakh crore rupees. Through ARC sale, total asset of almost 2 lakh crore rupees have been sold in last 4 years for a purchase consideration of 90,000 crore rupees. And stress investors have invested 50,000 crore rupees in last 4 years. And if we see last 2 years data, ARC and stress investors have invested almost 80% of the purchase consideration. Despite all these progress which has been made, we have seen investors have been facing a lot of challenges. In IBC process, out of 3,900 plus cases which have been admitted, only 250 cases have been resolved. As of today, as per IBBI bulletin, over 2,100 cases are waiting for resolution, out of which almost 1,100 cases are waiting for resolution over a period of 270 days. Even RBI resolution framework has faced a lot of challenges because of different approaches by lenders. In ARC also, we have seen that aggregation continues to be a big challenge. COVID-19 has also slowed down the process of resolution because there are a lot of challenges in doing diligence by the investors. With this background, let me start this panel discussion. For our panel discussion, we have with us Mr. Amit Kansal. Amit is Chief Investment Officer of Aditya Birla Stress Asset AMC, which is running Category 2 Alternative Investment Fund, which is focusing on special situation and distress opportunities. Amit has over 18 years of experience, and he has been working with Aditya Birla Group for last 10 years. Previously, he worked with ICICI Bank and Ernst & Young. We have, welcome Amit. We have Mr. Anuj Kapoor. Anuj is a Managing Director and Head of Corporate Client Services at UBS since 2017. Anuj has 20 plus years of experience in investment banking and corporate advisory. Previously, he worked with Arthur Andersen and Barclays. In his last position with Barclays, he was Managing Director and Investment Banking Division Head responsible for India mid-cap coverage and Head of Structured Finance. Welcome, Anuj. We have Mr. Rahul Chawla. Rahul is a Managing Director at Deutsche Bank and Head of Global Credit Trading India and Co-Head Investment Banking Coverage India since 2014. Rahul has previously worked as Head of Structured Finance at G Capital Services and as Managing Director of Credit Suisse Investment Banking Division. Welcome, Rahul. We have Mr. Rajiv Chaube. Mr. Rajiv Chaube is the Chief Legal Officer, Company Secretary, and an Executive Committee member of ACC Limited, a part of Swiss major Lafarge Holcim. Rajiv has more than 2 decades of experience in manufacturing as well as IT company. Prior to joining ACC, he was the General Counsel of SCL Infosystems Limited and Vice President Legal and Company Secretary of Vedanta Limited. Rajiv and his team has been recognized by various forums, including Indian Corporate Council Association. Welcome, Rajiv.
Thank you, Mr. Jain.
And last but not the least, we have Mr. Sanjay Tibriwala, Chief Executive Officer of Phoenix ARC. Sanjay Tibriwala has over 25 years of diverse post-qualification experience in area of finance, having worked in manufacturing companies as well as service sector. For last 12 years, he has been working with Phoenix ARC, a leading ARC. Prior to being elevated as Chief Executive, he was working as Chief Finance Officer. He has also worked with Kotak Bank, Thomas Cook, Edelweiss Capital, and many other entities. My first question is to Rahul. Rahul, we have seen very active participation of financial investors in the Indian stress markets. Please share your views and experience from financial investors' perspective and challenges faced by them.
Thank you. Welcome, all the panelists here. Good opportunity for all of us to discuss what, is a very exciting business for global investors at large. As you rightly said, the numbers that you talked about, go into billions of dollars of money that is required, both from a resolution perspective and also from a perspective of what has been put into the Indian distress market. I think the biggest attractiveness for the financial investor when they look at India is the fact that there is a diverse set of assets which are available across diverse sectors as well. There is inherent value given the fact that there is a market which these companies have catered to in a domestic sense, and this continues to remain, a market which potentially has a lot more attractiveness to them. If you go back and you took some numbers, some of the key transactions that have closed both from the IBC perspective as well as from a secondary market purchase of distressed paper, which was then aggregated by investors, and then a change of control or a restructuring plan was submitted, you will see very active participation of what you call financial investors. Some of them no longer are treating themselves as financial investors because in a certain specific industry, let's say if it's real estate or if it's financial services, these people also become strategic investors from that perspective. So they therefore look for aggregating all of this to potentially derive more value from infusing more liquidity into these companies and then running them as independent companies. I think the challenge is that most of these investors, as they discuss and including our own experience as we see the market, has been, I would say, threefold. First is from a process perspective. It is a new process, so it has faced certain teething issues. I think after the teething issues, as the sort of regulation was made more robust, I think the key issue that remains from an investor perspective is the timeline of deal closure and certain goalposts that keep changing as the process keeps going on. So I think from an investor perspective, that is something which they look for, not necessarily the highest maximum value till the last day the asset is not resolved. I think that's one area where investors do get a little, spooked as the process goes on, because a lot of time and money is spent in doing this. Second, I think, is the fact that there is, what I would say, paperwork that gets into it, which is not, accessible, which is not automated across the sort of various geographies that these investors work in. Uh, it may sound very, small as an issue, but when you have an investor which is sitting in New York somewhere with his team in, India and some other jurisdiction in the world, not having online, full access of data becomes a huge challenge for them. And we've seen that play out a couple of times when there is, bids are being submitted, there is lack of transparency of the data they have received because the physical paper or physical data was not made available to them. And the third thing, which has been addressed partly through the RBI secondary loan task force, has been the fact that some of these investors would like to access this market, especially the security receipts, directly as well, because they feel that there is a bit more efficiency if they have the larger amount of capital to access this market, can do it directly. So in these three things, if we can get more efficiency, I think the desire of the investors to put more money to use will only increase from here on.
So Rajiv, I will come to you. So from strategic investors' perspective, would you like to share your views and the challenges which strategic investors have been facing in this market for last couple of years?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Jain, as you are aware, some of the insolvency process, especially I would like to take the name of the SR process, which has taken more than 600 days to be resolved. Or currently, if we see the Bhushan Power and Steel case, although NCLAT has approved the scheme, there are appeals which are currently pending in Supreme Court. So these are just examples. I think the concern here is that when there is a stressed asset, for a strategic investor, the timing and the timelines is very, very important. And I think when the framers of the code were drafting the code, they came up this with this 180 plus 90 days, 270 days. This was basis and experience of other jurisdiction, because I think an asset is relevant as long as it is good, right? And there are, when a strategic investor is actually putting in money into the stressed asset, he has a business plan or he has some strategy that he is putting in money, and maybe within a defined time frame he has to revive the asset or has to revive the company. So unfortunately, because this entire law is new to India, completely new, we had a new code in 2016, and in fact, if we see the entire judiciary, whether it is NCLT or NCLAT or Supreme Court, many of them were dealing with this law for the first time, and hence there were a lot of confusions. And also, I think there was a mindset issue, because many of these promoters, they were sitting on these assets and they defaulted, knowing that there are various ways of managing out the loan, whether it is debt recast or rollover, or there were various schemes till this code came into effect, and when default was defined, that once you have defaulted, and then RBI came up with the first round of list of 12 stressed asset. I think this entire for a strategic investor, I think the most key issue is the timing issue in the sense, and that is why you see the central government being conscious of this timing issue, came up with an amendment saying that the entire process has to be completed within 330 days, if I correctly remember, including litigation. It's a different issue that again the regulatory courts have said that we are not bound by that. But still, I think timing is one of the critical issues. And then obviously there are other process issues which over a period of time, in my view, has got resolved. Classical case is when we are making a plan, how much obviously the financial creditor who is secured has a better recovery when compared to operational creditors, and there were litigation around that. So I think there are issues overall, and my biggest concern at this point of time is the amendment which the government has brought under section 10A of defining the specified limit, in the sense during this entire COVID period, even for defaults which has happened prior to the COVID, March, if we take March 2020 as the headline, even those defaults cannot be pressed into the insolvency process. And my own personal view is that this is the time when assets have defaulted or continue to default. Okay, I can understand during COVID defaults happening because of lack of business continuity plans, I can understand. But for the defaults which has already happened, this is a very good time for an asset buyout. And this entire activity around this cease of M&A, I would say, or buying out stressed assets is completely at standstill. So this, my own view is that government should remove this embargo, because I think COVID is the new normal. 6 months have passed. I think those businesses which had stress was for initial 1 or 2 months, and most of the companies, barring maybe tourism or hospitality industry, I think most of the basic industry has bounced back. So there is no justification for continuing this embargo or not invoking the insolvency process. This is my view, Mr. Jain, on what is very relevant or important for the strategic investment.
You got it. So Rajiv, your submission regarding this embargo, I think this is a debatable issue. From investors' perspective, I think you are right. But if we look at from borrowers' perspective, certain borrowers who are facing a lot of difficult times, and they are looking for some relief. And we have seen RBI coming out with a special resolution plan for such cases. So certainly they are looking for relief under that resolution. Even Supreme Court has been talking that relief should be provided for corporates who have been hit by COVID. Having said that, if any borrower who has defaulted prior to 1st of March, certainly that case can be taken by the financial lenders to IBC process. My second question to you is, you talked about challenges which strategic investors have been facing in IBC process. But we have seen this RBI resolution 2019 guidelines. I think that can be used by strategic investors to really take care of delays. So why it is not taking off? What are the challenges you are facing? Would you like to comment?
Yeah, again, I think, Mr. Jain and other panelists, I think the whole IBC process becomes very, very attractive when compared to an M&A space outside IBC is that you get as asset, and since you don't have a few full due diligence, under the IBC process, you get some protection, that protection can be from past demands, dues. It can include any kind of prosecutions. So there is a lot of it comes as a package for any, especially any past non-compliance and all. So you basically get a clean slate as a new promoter who comes in. That I think doesn't become an attractive proposition if you are doing a resolution outside the IBC process. So I think
Got it.
that is one. So, this is again my personal view that if I want to buy the same asset under IBC vis-a-vis outside the IBC, I would prefer to have the blessings of the NCLT, because that gives me certain protection. Because I think the point is that I'm not able to do a full-fledged due diligence. I think one of Mr. Rahul was making the point on providing data room, and there is lack of data, and that is where a strategic investor sometimes, especially those investors who are not from India, and they do not know the ground or the turf, they are little reluctant to put in money. But even for an Indian promoter or a strategic investor, I think there are a lot of unknowns about many stressed assets, and hence I think there is little bit of reluctance in terms of going for an asset outside the IBC space. That's my personal view, and that is where I think we have not seen. I think there is also a little bit of concern from the banks, because if you do a resolution outside the IBC process, then there may be question asked that what is the percentage of haircut, why you have taken, and there may be an inquiry or investigation tomorrow. So even the high officials in the bank, they are reluctant to work out a resolution process. Whereas under the IBC process, when once NCLT approves, then it has the force of a law. Nobody can question. So I think this needs to be addressed, and people should be encouraged, because I think the banks will get money quickly, and also asset will not lose its sheen, because delays is actually may damage the whole attractive proposition which a stressed asset may be.
Okay. So now let me move to Anuj. So Anuj, we have seen strategic investors participating particularly through IBC process. But for them, arranging funds has been a very big challenge. The traditional financiers like banks or NBFCs are not really encouraging or not lending money for such acquisitions. So, in your opinion, what can be done? What kind of innovative products can be developed for such strategic investors to invest in such companies?
Sure, Mr. Jain. I think, first of all, you're right that in terms of the financial resources available to fund these acquisitions in stressed assets, there's pretty much been equity money that's been pumped in to acquire these assets, whether it's strategics or financial investors. The law of the land, as well as the current state of affairs as far as this particular IBC process is concerned, compels pretty much equity, or let me put it another way, pretty much obviates any other sources of funding to easily come in and fund these acquisitions. In my opinion, I think a few steps could be taken. There is clearly demand for debt money or overseas funds to come in and buy these assets and supplement the equity money that is coming in. So it's not a question of whether there is interest or not. I think, first of all, the ECB regulations, the way they are structured currently in terms of the restrictions on end use, as well as the pricing caps that are available, or rather compelled on overseas money borrowings, those need to be relaxed in the case of investments in distressed debt. I think that would lead the way for foreign debt capital to flow in alongside equity, whether it's in the form of loans or in the form of bonds as well, because there is a concept of junk bonds prevalent across the globe. And when I say junk, very close to default grade or a C category rating. And there are a set of investors who follow this market and play in this market very, very actively. So why not India? We have seen a lot of interest from foreign investors in distressed assets in India. I would say, secondly, some of the regulations, like, for instance, foreign investors are not allowed to invest directly into security receipts issued, and they need to go via an ARC. That is also something perhaps the central bank could review. And also allowing investors to invest beyond a 10% stake in an ARC is also, as the law matures on a lot of promulgations have come about, I think it's time to revisit some of these enactments as well. I would say lastly, as far as attracting domestic money or domestic debt money is concerned, we should see if for certain situations, large situations, banks which have a certain scale and net worth, if banks can be allowed to fund these acquisitions. Traditionally, banks in India have not been allowed to fund share acquisitions. Having said that, this is a transparent process, and now it's been 4 years plus since IBC has been in place. And reviewing the situation wherein banks and large banks can be allowed to play in this space is something that needs to be looked at as well.
Got it. Got it. So taking this question further, so let me come to Amit. So Amit, we have seen huge participation of foreign investors in the security receipts issued by ARC companies. Would you like to share why domestic money is not coming for investment in security receipts?
So that's a very interesting question, Sanjay. So before we look at the domestic kind of issues that are facing domestic investors, let's look at the kind of investors or the kind of money that flows globally, right? It is either a retail or HNI money, which is routed through funds, or it is institutional money, which is either comes directly or some part of it is also again routed through funds. So it could be banks money, it could be pension fund, it could be insurance funds. So it's a very vibrant market globally, and it's a huge market, upwards of hundreds of billions of dollars that is there dedicated to stress assets and special situations. And we are not talking about, credit funds and hedge funds, which can kind of complement and further increase this kitty. Now, if you look at the domestically, alternate investment itself has not taken off as a very attractive asset class for investors. So in terms of any retail or HNI money coming in, that's not there at all in distressed asset. So some kind of money has flown into real estate, but again, Indians are known to have a penchant for real estate and real assets. So maybe that could be attributed in part to that. But in stress assets, that's not the case. And again, stress assets has been a very nascent market, just kind of taking off after the IBC, pre-IBC anyway, it was kind of off limits for most of these guys, and even foreign interest was very low. So in nutshell, if you look at retail participation is, absolutely not there. Then if you talk of institutional money, whether it is mutual funds, they are not allowed to invest due to the restrictions on the investment grade paper, the credit rating, and the kind of, regulations that are there. If you look at PFRDA, again, it is not allowed, pension money is not flowing in. In fact, there's a with great lot of difficulty, some kind of money is being pushed into equities. Otherwise, equity itself as an asset class is perceived risky now. And here we are talking about an extreme end of the spectrum, which is stress assets. Or you look at insurance money. So now if you look at the sources of the money, they themselves are not available. And then on top of that, like if you look at what Anuj just said, banks are, bank money is not there. Again, under RBI regulations, there's also this stigma issue, because the same asset which had turned and, NP in my books, how can I lend to that? On top of that, if you look at RBI regulations, they are also not very conducive. So RBI tried to do, some kind of this thing. I think that's where, Sanjay Tibrewala can speak better, but Kotak, kind of floated their ARD platform in the bank. I think IndusInd also tried to do something. But again, the regulations are too prohibitive and restrictive for any meaningful play. People find it better to float, new platform, either an ARC or an AIF, and, take a plunge through that, which again has its own limitation in terms of, you have to allocate capital from, one pocket to the other, and it's not fungible. Unlike, again, global institutions, where it is just a part of small part of the overall pool is allocated. So it's a very diversified play. And, so you can absorb those kind of, a little bit of a shock here and there, even if it is there, and it allows for a long-term kind of a commitment to the businesses. Whereas if you try and make a very specialist kind of vehicles, then it's a very individualistic player-driven approach, and serious money cannot come. So, there's always a talk of SBI floating this fund, coming with this fund, or, ICICI, try to do something with the, Aon and all. But if you really look at in the context of Indian market, Indian bank market or Indian financial market, it won't be even a fraction. Whereas globally, it's a very, decent. So I think these are some of the issues we need to grapple with in terms of regulators, whether it is mutual fund, PFRDA, IRDA, or in terms of increasing investor awareness, to and attract retail participation, or even maybe deepening the secondary market. See, one of the reasons, you won't, get retail money is that there's no liquidity, right? People will not like to be locked in, unlike a equity where you can sell even if it has a loss, unlike a real estate, asset class where you know that, okay, you are investing in a land which is of a tangible this thing. So stress assets liquidity is also something very important to, attract investment. And another thing that one can look at, though it's not that it will open the floodgate, but right now there's also a restriction as to the kind of investors. So like let's say if you talk of ARC security receipts, only a qualified institutional buyer is allowed to invest. So it does pose challenges. We have seen at times it does prevent certain investors from coming and investing money, and they really have to try and route the money through QIB. In some cases, they are that serious that they would go at that length to route their money. In some cases, people just give it a pass. So all in all, I think we have to make it more investor friendly. We have to attract investors rather than kind of put up fancies which puts them off.
Let me come to Mr. Sanjay Tibriwala. So Sanjay, Rahul and Anuj did mention that foreign investors would like to invest directly rather than investing through SRs issued by ARC companies. Somehow it implies that they don't see value addition being done by ARC. Would you like to comment on this observation and how you can really add value to these foreign investors who have been investing through ARCs?
Thanks for the question, Sanjay. And I think what you're saying is a grievance which is there from various foreign investors that they feel that ARCs are not required and they should be allowed to directly buy loans. And Reserve Bank of India has also put out a draft note on on sale of assets where they are talking about expanding the canvas from the current universe, which is banks, NBFCs, and ARCs to actually anybody or any other domestic or foreign investor. Now, while conceptually it does sound a good idea to us because it expands the market overall, and obviously the serious players should be given the flexibility of structuring how they should be bringing in their money into the country. But when I look at it from a foreign investor, since being from an ARC perspective, I want to look at the concerns that the foreign investors have and what really can be done to mitigate those concerns, because those concerns are not really that large also. So I think the first main concern that the foreign investors have is that by law, ARCs are required to put in a minimum 15%. And obviously, which means that if you are doing a $100 million deal, the $15 million has to come from the ARC. So the foreign investor loses the opportunity to put that much money. Plus, not many ARCs might have that kind of bandwidth and capability to put that money. So partly something which we have been trying to convince the regulator is that the 15% minimum ARC investment comes from an era when seller bank were mostly investors in the ARC SRs. And so there was a requirement of an ARC having a large skin in the game to protect the seller bank. But if the seller bank is selling it on cash and the investors are savvy foreign investors or a savvy ARC, then why should there be a requirement of 15%? If you look at an AIF, in AIF, the investment manager's requirement is only 2.5% or 5 crores or some that kind of a threshold. So our suggestion, or one thing which will mitigate this concern of investors, is that in cash deals where the seller bank has no further stake, the ARC investment threshold should be brought down from 15 to maybe 5, or maybe in line with the SEBI AIF guidelines, because finally that's the exact role what that ARC is also playing in that scenario, being an investment manager or asset manager. The second other concern which I hear from foreign investors is they're talking about control, that if there is an intermediary like ARC in the picture, then they don't really have entire control on the transaction. And the ARC has a say because it also has an investment. Now, my counter to that is that the same logic applies to, say, an AIF also, where you have an anchor investor who puts in a large sum of money. And the control comes by way of protective rights, by way of putting certain criteria that for certain kind of actions, you will go back and take a consent of majority investor. That's more like a protective right, which is a well enshrined concept, whether in AIFs or even private equity investments in the companies. They are also, protective investments there is also a fairly well-established process. So similar kind of process or a contractual understanding between the ARC and the investor should mitigate that concern from the investor's perspective. And the third and the major one which I hear is the costs. Now, obviously, ARC, which is structuring the transaction, taking the transactions in its books, also putting investments, does charge some kind of a trusteeship fees or management fees, which could be anywhere from anywhere between 1.5% of the total deal size on a per annum basis. But while that amount can look very high and also could look like a leakage, but I think the ARC has a value perspective here, which is that it is based in India, has feet on the ground, has enough experience in dealing with banks, dealing with borrowers, and a lot of ARCs are pretty legal savvy also, which means the context to that is that if the deal goes bad for any reason, a foreign investor who's sitting abroad without any presence, without having a feet on the ground, it's extremely difficult to legally fight the borrower or take the company to IBC, attend COCs, or try to invoke SARFAESI or any of those mechanisms. So there are value additions which the ARC brings into the picture, and the fees is obviously has been coming down over the years. At some point, it used to be 1.5%, 2%. Now I think it's more come down closer to 1%, and that is obviously a natural factor of competition in the ARC industry per se, because there are a lot of ARCs and they have all been vying for these sort of deals. So, so conceptually, if you ask me, I don't mind that to allow foreigners to come in, to allow foreign investors to directly come into India, directly buy loans. But the one other factor which is very extremely important here is the entire concept of safeguards. So currently, who can buy loans? Bank, ARC, NBFC, entities domiciled in India, entities based in India, heavily regulated by Reserve Bank of India, or in the case of a mutual fund, heavily regulated by SEBI. But for foreign investors, there is some safeguard required. It should not be that they have a blatant way of, a typical hire and fire kind of stuff that they can come in whenever they want, walk out whenever they want, or transfer trade in foreign in Indian debt. That entity which does this business, most welcome, but should be regulated in a similar kind of way as a bank or an NBFC or an ARC which is dealing in loans is regulated. That makes sure that there is a level playing field and not too much, not creation of an arbitrage opportunity in this matter.
I think got your point. Your points are valid. I think let market forces decide whether foreign investors need ARCs or not. I think this draft circular from RBI will provide that kind of leeway to foreign investors. But I'm sure if ARCs are able to submit a valuable proposition to foreign investors, they may like to still avail the services of ARC company. Well, now let me come back to Rajiv. Rajiv, you talked about a lot of challenges being faced by strategic investors and through IBC process. We have also seen in this IBC getting evolved in last years. We have seen a lot of amendments being made to IBC. As you rightly talked about, this is a new law, and even our judiciary is also learning about IBC process. So would you like to suggest some of the measures which is required to be taken to meet the expectation of strategic investors through IBC process?
Sure, Mr. Jain. See, one of the issues, if I take the example of the telecom companies, now there is currently a issue pending before the Honorable Supreme Court that if there is a spectrum, whether that spectrum would be part of the insolvency process or not. In the sense, if you take out the spectrum, in the sense whether the spectrum is allowed to be traded or not. Now, there is a view of the Department of Telecom, Government of India, that spectrum cannot be traded, and if a company has defaulted in terms of paying the license fee, the license has to be surrendered. Now, if we stretch this entire argument of the central government to say other sectors, example in the mining sector. So take for example, cement. In cement also you can only operate a cement plant only when you have a mining lease for limestone. Now, if in an insolvency process, and I think this is where there is no commonality in terms of approach. If we take the example of Binani Cement, there also there were mining leases. Mining leases, the lease is the lesser is the Government of India or the state government who owns the mines, and you pay a royalty for the mineral which you mine. There, I think the resolution process allowed the transfer. In fact, to resolve the issue of the JP insolvency process, there was specific amendment brought in where captive mines were allowed to be transferred on a payment of a transfer fee. Right? I think the same approach should be allowed for telecom also, because these are all natural assets, and you can't do a pick and choose, apply a different yardstick for a mining asset. And suppose somebody, if take the example of Bhushan insolvency process, there also again my iron ore lease is involved. Without iron ore, how will you manufacture steel? So especially on the telecom sector where there is a lot of stress, in my view, the government of should take a common approach and allow if they have to take some haircut, they have to take the haircut in the larger interest of the resolution and meeting the expectation of all the stakeholders.
I think, Rajiv, your points are valid, but at the same time, we also need to appreciate this legal system for IBC is evolving, and certainly what we were 3 years back, maybe certainly we are far better today. Let's hope that the legal system will get further evolved.
Yeah.
So with this, let me come to Rahul. Rahul, we have witnessed a huge interest of strategic investors in certain sectors like metal, cement, road, to some extent in power sectors. But other sectors, the interest is very muted. Would you like to give your views why only few sectors are getting in interest of financial and strategic investors and other sectors are not getting any interest?
I think there are 2 or 3 reasons. I mean, first of all, in the interest of what you were debating with Sanjay about, ARCs and foreign investors, I think you made a very relevant point. Let the market forces decide the need for it. My one line to add to what Sanjay said, I think all very valid points. I think ARCs have a role to play in terms of resolution, in terms of, especially portfolios. The era of cash, buying means that, the SR route has become a little less sort of important, and therefore foreign investors only have a grudge in that respect. But anyway, I thought it would be useful to just give our perspective since we were quoted on that. In terms of sectors and interest, I think you have to see that financial investors are looking for one of 2 options. Either they are looking to see if they, as a financial investor, have other assets which they have in their portfolio, either as distressed funds or as private equity funds, which they can combine and have synergies and therefore exploit this. And in that respect, sectors like commodities, pharma, real estate, financial services become the most relevant ones for them to play with. The second thing what a financial investor does is he looks at the inherent value in a company. Now there again, companies which are real economy companies with hard assets, with collaterals, with mining licenses, with leases, etc., become easier for them to value, appreciate, and then play a role in terms of either the trading of that paper or aggregation of that paper. So I think depending on what is the usefulness of that company from a real economy perspective, you will see investor appetite come in a large way in that sectors. I don't think they are wedded to or against a specific sector. Obviously, there will be certain things like pure services where there is an asset in play as we speak, which has the distribution capacity and which is being very actively contested by both strategic and financial investors. Now, if you have a distribution platform, that makes a different perspective from a services perspective, but otherwise, pure service industries will find difficult, from a financial investor appetite.
Got it. So this question is to Anuj and Amit both. So you talked about various challenges faced by domestic investors to invest in stress market. So is something being done to address those challenges so that we can get a lot of domestic money? Maybe Anuj may start and then Amit can add.
Sure, Sanjay. I think maybe a few seconds on just the process and where it stands today. We've all spoken about what the issues are with the process and what challenges are being faced. But I'd just like to add that for the first time in India, this is actually a landmark enactment or a judgment or a law which has come about 4 years back, because of which maybe we've not solved as many cases as we would have liked to because of the speed of the process. But having said that, I think for the first time in India, the promoter has the fear that if he does not meet his obligations on time, the keys to his factory may be taken away. So, kudos to the process. And there have been studies done globally around the strictness of the law and how this entire law was written. And it's regarded as one of the top 10 strictest processes in the world, the IBC process. There are challenges, but having said that, as you rightly said, Sanjay, we've come a long way in the last 3-4 years, and I'm sure there'll be further fine-tuning to make this more conducive for investors. Now, coming to your point on how we can improve retail participation, I think this background is relevant because when does retail money come into play, or when would you and I invest into a certain product? When I see that there is a certain process that is established, there is transparency in the process, I understand the process, and I have seen the person next to me or my neighbor make money. So I think as case laws become more and more fluid, and as the transparency of the process improves, I think the regulator would do a great job in marketing the success of some of these processes to the retail investors. And as we see institutions, COSA institutions make money, is when perhaps the retail investor would have the courage to channel into this particular product. Amit spoke about the corporate bond markets and potentially retail money flowing through mutual funds. I would say at this point of time, and the central bank has tried for more than a decade, many years, to enhance the corporate bond market liquidity beyond, as in below a AA grade, and we have struggled for many years. So if we are struggling for a AA or a below AA credit investment and participation of retail investors, I think it's a bit far-fetched at this point of time to think about distressed investment attracting retail investors. But having said that, there is a class of investors, and especially in today's environment when interest rates are at an all-time low, it is a time to look at yield products, and people want to diversify, and a lot of the money is getting channeled into equity. So why not, if there are double-digit returns, mid-teen kind of returns in rupee terms being offered by these products, and there is comfort in the underlying process, a retail investor might want to pool in capital along with a bunch of investors and invest alongside some of the institutions.
Amit, can you briefly want to add?
Yeah, just a couple of small things. I think Anu just covered it mostly. So see, in terms of what I think has been done already, I think AF taxation was a big thing, right, till a year or two back. So I think the positive thing that has happened is I think it has been decluttered. So as an Indian investor, whether it's an individual, in corporate or whatever, so I don't pay any extra taxation, just pooling in my money through AF. So I think that's been a very welcome change. So obviously, people may argue that as compared to FPI, you pay much higher taxes. But being an Indian corporate citizen or an Indian individual, I think I'm anyway paying those kind of taxes. So no, I'm not worse off. So any other income that I earn, and whether I earn an income through an AF, so I think that's been a very welcome and positive change happened. I think what could be done probably. So again, I agree with Anuj. Retail is generally a follower. So retail is generally not a trend setter. Maybe the institutions will have to pick up that role of setting a trend, and maybe a certain, whether it's an insurance or a pension fund or some kind of big boys will have to take that lead, show the result to attract retail money. But still a suggestion, that I would like to make. So maybe they could allow some kind of a structuring where, there are sophisticated investors and, sponsors or money managers who are, let's say, allowed to take some kind of a first loss, so that gives a kind of a comfort to the investors, right? So if I have somebody, I'm just saying, limited, who says, okay, I'll be taking 25% of kind of a first loss in case it goes south. So I think that would also give a lot of comfort to the guys on the street. Okay, this is a guy who has been there, done it, and now he's willing to take the first loss, and still, like in today's environment where today there was an article, people are earning less than 4% in a liquid fund. So now if I am getting an opportunity to earn Maybe let's say the guy earns 18%, but for the services he's providing me, he gives 3, 4, 5%. But even if he gives me 12%, 13%, I think I would be okay with it. So I think, structuring somehow has always been looked little negatively. Maybe it's got to do, with the toxicity at the time of Lehman, but structuring can also be mean in a, positive sense. So if a strong sponsor is willing to put his money on the table and, play the role of an anchor, I think we should encourage that, because there also, I think a lot of people would come in.
Got it. So let me come to Sanjay Tibriwala. Sanjay, in IBC process, it is widely believed that IBC provisions are only favoring financial creditors and they are leaving little to operational creditors. What's your views on that?
Sanjay, before I just get into that, I just want to add one more bit to the earlier question. What Amit and Anuj said is that, there are so many HNIs who come and talk to us saying that they want to invest in distressed space. But unfortunately, we have to tell them that we don't have an option because because individuals are not allowed to invest in SRs. And if you have an NBFC, then only you can use an NBFC route and invest. So it's not really retail, but, large sophisticated individuals who run family offices or who understand the concept of risk. And it has also been a long-standing demand of ours with our regulator to allow HNIs to invest and put it with some threshold that, a minimum 1 crore ticket size, for example, like what AIF has, that there is a certain minimum ticket size for anybody to invest in AIF so that you can cut out the non-serious investors. So that is also one possible option which is there. Having said that, coming back to your question on FCs and OCs. So see, what has happened is a company which goes into the bankruptcy code, there are two options that happens. One is either there is a resolution plan which comes up and the company is able to get out of the IBC process, or there are no plans or there are no acceptable plans and the company goes into liquidation. And liquidation has got a pretty well-defined process in terms of how the funds will be distributed, how payments will be made to various levels of creditors. So while a company under bankruptcy and pre-liquidation, there is nothing defined. So the role model is what is there in liquidation. So the liquidation model, which says that first money is paid to the secured financial creditors, then unsecured financial creditors, and then to operational creditors, is by default just extrapolated and used as a reference point or as a benchmark in any IBC process. Now, since OCs are at the bottom of the pyramid in liquidation, that exactly flows here. Now, fortunately, the law provides that the financial creditors or the members sitting in the COC have to be fair and have to consider the interest of all the stakeholders. But if I am sitting and I think that I have a 100 rupee claim and I'm going to collect only 50 on my claim per C. So somebody who is below the line from the creditor in distribution is, extremely difficult for the financial creditor to think very objectively and fairly about the operational creditor. Yes, there is some amount which always gets paid. And also the operational creditors have now gone and litigated enough, specifically in the SR Steel case, where the Supreme Court gave a very detailed judgment on the rights of operational creditors and, what is being seen as fair to the operational creditors. Because prior to that, the view was that the same percentage of claims should be paid to both, whether to financial creditors or operational creditors. But now I think it's got established very clearly the process is there. So to some extent, I agree with your point that it is unfair, but that's the way now the system is, and because they are the last rung of the distribution metrics, there's hardly a choice which is there for them. But I've seen cases where operational creditor to a Bhushan Steel or an SR Steel have themselves gone into IBC now because they had a large claim. That claim, they got paid 10% in that claim, and so they are now unable to pay their own lenders. So there is some bit of cascading effect. It will be nice to have a more logical way of doing it, but very frankly, I don't know how it can be done. Except maybe one idea could be to give them seats on the COC, but then that might become very unfair on the financial creditors because they have much larger stake and also security of the assets.
I think, Sanjay, the another point is, the financial creditors really helped the company to establish itself. And even in resolution plan, uh, the adjudicating authority looks at the resolution has to be fair. And we have also seen resolution applicants try to consider the interest of operational creditors. Eventually, he has to deal with those operational creditors once he takes over the company. So I think that assessment that operational creditors have been treated unfairly in the whole process may not be entirely correct. Maybe in few cases that may be the case, but they are being treated, and generally they are also getting their due from the resolution applicant. So let me come to the last question. So we heard from our panel members that delay in resolution process under IBC has been one of the major challenge for investors. So Amit, do you believe that pre-pack deals under IBC can be a game changer?
Yeah, I think so, Sanjay. So actually, again, if you look at the reasons for delay, there has been a lot of litigation, that has pushed back in terms of, information, in terms of soliciting bids. And again, if you look at in terms of, percentage outcome, the kind of number of resolutions that have happened vis-a-vis number of liquidations that has happened, if we are looking to improve that, I think pre-pack can be a game changer, because here there's an incentive for the existing management also to run that process early on. One. Secondly, the continuity of the business, through the continuity of the business, a lot of value can be preserved, right? So, and thirdly, like you were just discussing about FCs versus OCs, so I think all the stakeholders are kind of, at least in that sense, incentivized to, come and quickly, keep the company as a going concern rather than, let it go to a scenario where the value starts depleting. And it's especially true for a company which are not that much asset heavy, in services, in EPC, in a lot of other industries where even the talk of an IBC or an insolvency can trigger a decrease in value. I think pre-pack can be a really game changer. While in another scenario, I think it saves on cost, it saves on time. So I think it's a very welcome thing. Only thing is probably we need to build safeguards so that it's a transparent process, because again, in terms of 29A process, if an existing management is working with a potential bidder, how those are kind of, married to each other. Similarly, like today also there's this talk that OC should be paid in full. But again, to Sanjay's point and to your point also, if I have to build a company, so probably a fine balance needs to be struck. But yeah, it can't be denied. And if you look from the experience of UK and US, I think it has panned out pretty successfully. So I think there's a case for trying out pre-pack, and I think with the relevant safeguards, and again, as the panelists have talked about, the case laws develop, I think it could be a game changer. It is the way to go.
Good.
Jen, if I come on very short on that point, see,
Sure.
generally, typically as lawyers, there are disputes, and in dispute, you suppose you have arbitration, you go to an arbitrator, and then you do a settlement, and that settlement takes the shape of a consent decree, which is enforceable in a court of law. So, pre-packed thing can also be take first you invoke the insolvency process, and there you worked out a settlement which, so I think if something like that can be worked out, it will be a win-win situation in mind.
Got it. Got it. So basically, we can have best of both RBI Resolution 2019 framework and IBC. And what are the challenges?
There is an amendment for working out a settlement. So I think that's a very welcome step.
Good. So thank you, my fellow panel members. I think we had a very meaningful discussion on this subject. We discussed various issues which are being faced by both strategic and financial investors. And we also heard the views of our panel members, how this process can be smoothened going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jain.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Mr.
Sanjay.
Jain.
Thank you, panelists, for an engaging discussion. Over the last few years, we have witnessed some of the top industry experts demystify the nuances of the insolvency and bankruptcy regime and share their insights on what can be done to make the prevailing legislations more accessible for all the stakeholders, and given us some valuable insights to ponder on. While IBC 2016 has streamlined the insolvency resolution process, there is still scope for a more robust legislation. I think what we can definitely hope to see as time and the current situation changes, the profound and lasting lessons we shall take away from the current scenario. Thank you to each one of you for being part of this and being there with us throughout. We hope that you enjoyed this event. Stay connected with us on social media using the hashtag #ETLegalWorld. We would like to know your excitement and your experiences. Once again, a big thanks to our partners for collaborating with us and making our vision a reality. In association with Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, co-powered by Indus Law, Associate Partner Ernest. Thank you and stay safe.